Inspector's here to discuss this afternoon. So he sent three.
Discuss
reports.
this afternoon with who?
For all the saints. For all the saints who from their labors rest. Oh, when we walk with the Lord in the light of God's word, what a glory is shed on our way as we move in good.
Is anybody able to hear me?
God abides
Yeah.
with
Oh, you can. Okay, great.
Yes, we can hear you, but we're just listening to music before we get
Yes.
started. Thank you so much for being with
Understand.
us. And you can send any questions you have to the chat. Thank you.
and with all who will trust and obey, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much.
Sorry about all of this.
No, no
I
problem.
am working 1,000 miles a minute and I'm all
I shall wear a crown. I shall wear a crown when it's all over. When it's all over, I shall wear a crown. I shall wear a crown. When it's all.
Good afternoon, everyone. And we are going to turn it over to Pastor Kaji Doza.
Good afternoon, everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, we are so delighted to welcome you all to this wonderful and amazing opportunity to have a conversation between the Daughters for Justice and members of the NYPD. And first and foremost, I want to thank all of the Daughters for Justice, and we'll explain who we are in just a minute. And also especially Chief Maddrey, who has pulled together a really important group of folks from NYPD to be in on this important conversation. So we do have a format that I wanted to explain before we get into the call so that you know what to anticipate. First, we're going to have this welcome time, and I will explain a little bit more about who Daughters for Justice is and what we can expect for the day. And we know that we have a really phenomenal group of faith leaders, clergy women and other women faith leaders who have joined us today who have important questions to ask. So there will be time later on in the conversation to ask questions, but we have also structured this conversation to address 4 specific areas, which I'll get into in just a minute. Once we have had a chance to go through these questions that we have already discussed, you know, the spirit and sentiment of with the NYPD, then we will also have a chance to go ahead and talk this through as a larger group. And so we encourage you to use the Q&A function on Zoom, which is at the bottom of the screen. You can click on that and place your question specifically in there. And if you just want to type those out anytime during the chat, during the conference, then we will see these questions. And if they are relevant to the, or especially like present at the moment of the conversation, we might sort of add it then, or we will add it for sure as we are able during the time of Q&A. And we have actually allocated quite a bit of time for that because we want to make sure that your voices are included in this conversation. So my name is Pastor Kaji Dosha, and I am the senior pastor of the Park Avenue Christian Church, also co-chair of the board of the New Sanctuary Coalition. And it's really my honor to have you join us. We wanted to gather a group of women faith leaders from New York City to come together and offer a perspective that we feel is especially helpful for the NYPD as it and the city is re-envisioning public safety in this place. And the 5 of us who have founded Daughters for Justice are here and will be leading the conversations with the NYPD led by Chief Maddrey. And I'm going to ask Chief Maddrey to introduce everyone who he's invited on in just a moment. But as we have come together, what we saw was that when NYPD would bring us together for faith leader conversations, that there were some of us who felt like we were really in alignment and felt a spirit like God was calling us to work together in a particular way. And so we started to work very hard on understanding what we felt priorities were in conversations with NYPD and in re-envisioning public safety for this city. And each of us has different areas of expertise, and you'll see that come out in the conversation, but so do you. And so what we want to make sure is that in this format, in this time of pandemic, still gives us all a chance to feel as if we can be productively working towards something. And this is one conversation of many that we anticipate being able to have with all of our voices included as well. And before we go much farther, I wanted to turn this over to Apostle Stacey Ramos, who is going to offer a prayer for us. Thank you. And Apostle, you want to make sure you unmute.
I always forget that. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Reverend Kaji, and thank you for entering us all in with the lovely music from the Park Church. It really put us all on one accord. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're here. My volume is kind of low, but that's as loud as it goes, so I'll try to project my voice as much as possible. If you can all just pray with me, we are here, we're coming in unity, and we just want to see God do some awesome stuff. So please pray with us right now. Amen. Blessed eternal Father, we give you thanks for another day. As you awoke us in our right minds, our hearts and spirit, all to give you praise. Have mercy on us today and show us your grace as we engage in new beginnings and witness that you are still doing a new thing. Bring unity, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to surround our focus and our cause. This morning, we give you thanks for the organizers, for the leadership of NYPD, for the clergy fellowship, and everyone that is on here on this afternoon. As your word declares in Hebrews 10 and 24, let us consider one another to provoke love and good works. Provide us today, Lord, as always, with great takeaways that will extend from generations to generations. We claim on this day that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there will be freedom. Touch every speaker, touch every topic, and let your Shekinah glory have its way today. We pray all of these things in the mighty and matchless name of Yahshua HaMashiach, who is Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Thank you so much, Apostle. And in just a moment, we are going to turn things over to introduce our membership here. But just to begin, I would love to introduce the Daughters for Justice. So we just heard from Apostle Ramos, and we also have Dr. Deborah Jenkins, she can wave, and we have Minister Only Love Alston, and we have the Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer, and then myself. So we are really grateful for you, also grateful to our staff and everyone at the NYPD, led by Chief Maddrey, in this effort to pull this together. We're just so grateful. Now, what I'd love to do is turn it over to Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer to explain what brought us here, and then we will turn it over to Chief Maddrey. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just before I start, I want to acknowledge Jennifer Jones Austin, who has joined us, who is part of this great team of people working with the NYPD on the governor's orders, executive order, bringing together conversations and a plan for police reform and reinvention in April. So Jennifer, it's great to have you here. Thank you for being part of this, and everybody else who's joined. I wanted to take us back a little way, say, you know, a galaxy far, far away, a time long, long ago, 3 commissioners, if you can believe it, back, when there was official policies of stop and frisk and broken windows policing and a radicalization report, even that those of us at the Interfaith Center of New York were very concerned about on the account of the impact on the Muslim communities. And how in 2013 and 2014, some of that began to be challenged with a city council resolution on introducing an inspector general, and even a few lawsuits about stop and frisk and trespassing arrests that resulted in a judge saying to the NYPD, if I don't have this wrong, look, you've got to begin reforming, and you've got to take this policing, community policing requirements seriously. And at the same time, that's what the NYPD was doing under a different chief. There was the introduction of the NCOs in about 2014 or so. There was more of an emphasis on community policing, and the body-worn cameras too were introduced about 5 or 6 years ago. So we were part of a joint remedial process with a lot of community groups at that time. And again, you know, the ball was rolling in a different way, not just this past summer, but really about 5 or 6 years ago. At the same time, however, and it was a little discouraging, to put it mildly, innocent people were still dying at the hands of NYPD officers. And those officers seem to be enjoying a degree of impunity. We know their names: Eric Garner, Akai Gurley, Duran Small, and people with mental illness, Zahid Vassal, Deborah Danner, Mohammed Ba, and so many names that we don't know. And this was happening after those efforts of reform were underway. So we fast forward to this past summer and to the protests that happened after George Floyd's murder, and the passage up in Albany of a few bills that did make a difference, 50A, that made sure that abusive cops, we saw the complaints and the actions in their record, and also the making illegal of a chokehold, which had been against policy, but it was still happening. Well, those of us here today found ourselves both in the streets with protesters this summer and also part of clergy NYPD Zoom calls that were happening at the same time, but which were mostly made up of male clergy people, I have to say, no offense. We, however, think the Daughters of Justice came together with a sense that we had a particular important and unique voice to add in this conversation, as we had both major concerns and direct experience with police abuse in communities of color. But at the same time, we knew a lot about the unbelievable, insidious nature of domestic and intimate partner violence and the importance that the NYPD had in playing a role in safety for all the people of our community. So it's with that I want to say what an honor it is to be here today, Chief Maddrey, with you and your team, and also with other Daughters for Justice, Pastor Kaji Dosa, Minister Oni Love Alston, the Reverend Deborah Jenkins, Apostle Stacey Ramus, and all of you who've taken the time, women of faith and different clergy traditions, to be on the call today. So thank you very much. And I will now turn it back over to Chief Maddrey.
Thank you, Chief, for joining us.
Good afternoon, all. And to God be the glory. Today is such a beautiful day. Yes, I just had to take a moment to say that, because we originally were supposed to be in person, but with everything that's going on, God still made a way for us to still be together and still be able to have our conversation, which is so important. I want to take a quick moment to say to the Daughters for Justice, Apostle Ramos, Dr. Jenkins, Reverend Alston, Reverend Doja, and Dr. Breyer, thank you. Thank you for being incredible leaders, and just thank you for this opportunity today. And if anybody doesn't know, the leader of the Daughters for Justice are God, and that's why they're so powerful. All right, they came right into the Community Affairs office. They said, Chief, this is what we want to do. This is how we're going to do it. And I said, you're absolutely right. The incredible, a formidable group of women leaders of faith. And I just want to say thank you. And to all faith leaders, all clergy, all community leaders, to any and everyone on this call, people who just want to understand, seek more understanding, and be understood. Thank you for being on this afternoon. But forget about me. I want to take the time to introduce two sisters for justice. And that's what I'm calling them right now on this call, two sisters for justice. Our newly minted Chief of Patrol, my sister, my little big sister, Chief Juanita Holmes. And then of course, my other little sister, Deputy Inspector Victoria Perry, who's in charge of Community Outreach Division over here at Community Affairs. They're both on the call, and I just want to give them a round of applause and celebrate both of them, because they're just so incredible. And I believe that Commissioner Parker was supposed to be on, but I think he's caught on another call. So Commissioner Parker will probably be joining in later. But myself, Chief Holmes, Inspector Perry, we're here to start off with the panel and start off with the conversation and the questions. And we really look forward to just this dialogue. And if I may, Reverend Doja, if I could just let Chief Holmes say a quick word on new Chief of Patrol. Chief Holmes, Juanita, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for having me, and thank you to Chief Maddrey, my little big brother, for inviting me to this panel of extraordinary women. I'm happy and looking forward to meeting everyone personally one day. I know that some of the challenges that we have met with due to the circumstances, but it looks like there's a glimmer of hope in the near future if this vaccination is what they say it is. But thank you for having me, and looking forward to the questions here today.
Thank you so much. Well, we're really grateful to have everyone here. And just a reminder to people who have just started to join, but you are welcome throughout the conversation to drop questions into the Q&A. And that will be where we will be answering questions from, not from the chat. So if you did drop a question into the chat that you would like answered during the Q&A period, it needs to go in that section because otherwise it's just too much to cull through. So please do, you're encouraged throughout the conversation to drop in there, but we definitely want to hear from you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is just launch right into our formal conversation. And we would love to invite the Reverend Dr. Deborah Jenkins to lead this conversation. And I believe you're muted, Doc. Nope. Still can't hear you though. Let's see. No. That's interesting because we could definitely hear you earlier, but just can't hear you yet.
It's showing on her screen that it's still muted, Reverend Kaji.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would No.
Nope, we are not able. You might want to drop out and back in, and what we'll do is push to the next question, and then we'll make sure we can hear you. Thank you, friend. Okay, so the next question is on domestic violence reduction questions, and so I want to kick it to Minister Only Love.
Hi, good morning, everyone. And as we say in my faith tradition, shalom. Thank you so much to everyone who's on. Thank you, Chief Maddrey. Thank you, Chief Holmes and Inspector Perry. And thank you to all the Daughters for Justice and all the faith leaders who are on. One issue that I encountered as a young clergy woman was the high rates of domestic violence in the general community and in my faith community. And I want to greet Reverend Sally McNichol from Connect NYC, who has given my faith community a great deal of help, and Hanashim, which is a group of Hebrew women who partnered with me to deal with this issue. And so I wanted to ask the chief and everyone from the NYPD about how we can work together to combat domestic violence, because sadly, during this pandemic, the rates of domestic violence have skyrocketed, as you know. And so some people actually call domestic violence the pandemic within the pandemic. And so in light of this, what steps are the NYPD taking to partner with community-based organizations that work to end domestic violence? And also, what steps are you taking to partner with community organizations that are facing the pandemic of domestic violence? So that's my first two questions.
Thank you, Reverend Only Love. Thank you. I'm going to just start off, and then I'm going to ask Chief Holmes to jump in, because Chief Holmes at a point in her career was in charge of the domestic violence unit in the department. So she has a lot of corporate knowledge and a lot of knowledge. One thing I want to point out, in getting prepared for today's meeting, I ran all the domestic violence for the citywide. And if you look at our numbers, we're showing that we're down in domestic violence incidents, that we're down in every category except domestic shootings. That's the only category that we show up. And it's troubling to me because, you know, these are numbers and this is what we go by, but just what I hear, personal things that I hear, personal conversations that I've been involved with, something is wrong. Now, shooting is one thing that can't be hidden because, you know, once you take a bullet, you go to the hospital, we start doing our investigation. But other things, it is easy to say, you know, I'm not going to report it. And I think that's one of the biggest things working with our faith leaders, clergy, our CBOs, is to encourage people to come forward so they can get the help that they need. If we're not aware of a crime or an incident or violence or anything, disturbances in the home, we're not going to be effective. All right. Our domestic violence unit does a lot of things to help, but if they're not being reported, there's nothing we can really do. So I think one of the biggest things is just making sure all our doors are open as faith leaders, as police officers, as non-for-profit CBOs, to make sure we encourage people that it's okay to come forward and report it. Chief Holmes, can you give me a little backup on that?
And excuse me, Chief Maddrey, just really quick. I know for a fact, and my sisters from my faith community can attest, in my faith community, women don't go to the police. They go to other women teaching in the faith community. I was just teaching on Jews in Africa and started getting bombarded with inboxes on domestic violence. So I think there's a gap in reporting. Thank you. But I would love to hear from you, Chief Holmes.
Hi, so I echo Chief Maddrey's sentiments, but just to address some of your concerns regarding the community-based organizations and how they work with NYPD. We've always worked with them. I was the chief of domestic violence back in, I think, 2015 when I took the position. And a lot of relationships with one, for instance, is Safer Rising. And if you look at what's evolved out of that, we realized that there were a lot of inconvenience times for women to have someone to speak with regarding a safety plan or regarding if they didn't want to go criminal or maybe they wanted it addressed through family court. With that, we put advocates in pretty much each precinct. We have what's called a domestic violence advocate that's housed there. They are prepped with safety plans. They're accessible. Some hours usually range from 12 in the afternoon to 8 p.m., being that women, they know work. In addition to that, they have to pick up their children from school. But also they take a lot of phone calls and they do a lot of callbacks. But we made it convenient because we have in every family court what's called a family justice center. Staten Island being the last one to launch their opening back, I think it was in probably 2016. With that being said, they have over 35 providers. A lot of people don't know that. So no matter what you need, it can range from someone that just needs a crib. If you need diapers for the baby because funds are not substantial in a household, but there's an array of accessible resources in those family justice centers. And if a person's not able to make it to their particular family court, they can walk into their precinct. There they have an advocate there that they can speak to and guide them as far as how to attain some of those particular resources. But the reporting aspect is huge. Most people speak with a friend. A lot of domestic violence, serious assaults that I saw happening, and some met with their demise, unfortunately, were when a lot of victims made up their mind that they are going to get out of this relationship. And I think the biggest mistake is telling the particular person they're in the relationship with at that time while they're the only ones there. And a lot of times that's when we saw a lot of these assaults take place. We also saw where it appeared to be where there was this one serious assault and no history. It wasn't that it wasn't any history, it wasn't any reported history. So it had been going on for a long period of time without it ever being reported to the authorities or even one of the community-based organizations, such as Safe Horizon. So with that, I'm big on reporting and just encouraging people to report, but I know with that, they also have to feel safe. And a lot of them may be financially dependent on this particular person. So that's the importance of letting them know that there are different resources out there that may be able to help financially as well.
Thank you so much. And one thing I have learned from Connect and from experience is when a woman leaves, that is her most dangerous time. And so as we advocate for reporting, we also need to also partner with organizations that help people in safety planning, because the reporting piece can be the most dangerous piece. There's also an organization called Our Lives Matter, which is a national African-American women's organization that collects data from stories of women who were murdered. And they call it Black femicide. And between January and today, there's been about 300 murders. So there's a lot of things And we, of course, care about the shooting violence. I work with court-involved youth, and we have 2 youths in critical condition that I'm praying for right now. So we also want to think about how are we thinking about cure violence in an expansive way to even include intimate partner violence. So thank you, Chief. I didn't want to miss that important point about gun violence. But my colleague, Reverend Kaji, has a follow-up, and then I have one question that should be pretty quick to answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been a passion of my ministry, and actually I know a lot of the Daughters for Justice ministry and many of the people on the calls ministries as well. And what we often find is that there's a big gap between the initial moment where someone, and it's not just women, but someone in an abusive situation recognizes that there's something wrong, and then there's like a lot of space between where that becomes something that an officer or someone from the city or anyone else would participate in. In other words, there can be an argument where something gets violent, but it doesn't necessarily become a time for arrest, right? And so for those middle spaces, especially during this pandemic, where people have been stuck inside with each other in ways that are unnatural, what we have found is that the conflicts between intimate partners have just gone up so much. And they reach out to their clergy and they're like, we just need a break. We can't be around each other for a few more minutes. And if we call 311, which I do this for people all the time because they're afraid to make the call just in case it might trigger things they can't control, then it gets passed over to NYPD, but that feels like a bigger step than people are willing to make. And I know Chief Maddrey, you asked us in our last meeting to be constructive in our criticism. And this is one that I have, is that there isn't enough of a middle space for people who are starting on that road to have intervention. And what we would love to see is more of a process of being able to have intervention that doesn't lead to anything that's part of the criminal system, but that could help people just to cool down and get the support they need. And there are not, I can tell you right now, it's very difficult to get that kind of support at this point in the city. So just wanted to bring that up and see if you have any thoughts on that, Maddrey or Chief Maddrey or Chief Holmes.
And Reverend Kaji, just to quickly follow up, those of you who know my testimony know my family reached out for help when I was a child, and we ended up in my little brother and I ended up in foster care. But today, because I'm older than I look, there is preventative in foster care. So if a family is just struggling financially, but there's no abuse, the family can stay together. So I'm wondering if there can be a similar thing with DV, like a middle ground of prevention, but we'll turn it over to you, Chief Maddrey and Chief Holmes and Inspector.
So I'm sorry, Jeff, I just wanted to make mention of these family justice centers are designed to accomplish that. There's a criminal side and then there's a family side. And most people never even walk into a precinct that know about these particular justice centers that are housed in family court. We have officers that are assigned there in case someone wants to make a criminal report, but they don't feel comfortable walking into a precinct. But when you go there, there's this softer family intervention side, and that's designed to keep the family together. So a lot of people may not know that exists, but that's a huge component of the family justice centers, keeping the family together, minimal intervention. And it's just, maybe they're not doing they need to do a better job at branding that or marketing that, I should say. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Chief Matt.
No, and just to kind of support what you're saying. And these are like the organizations, the Family Justice Center, Safe Horizons, our CBOs. But I'm looking at a whole lot of interveners right here on this call. The clergy is a major part of the intervention with families. The clergy, I mean, if we could put on a scale or put on some kind of meter how many times the clergy have stepped in to save families, it would go off the scale. Your leadership, your wisdom, your teachings of the Bible are instrumental in helping families and keeping people together. Many times during my time in Brooklyn North, when I ran commands, when I ran the borough, a lot of times it was the clergy that were providing a lot of the help to the families, and not necessarily resources and financial, but just the guidance, the teaching, and the understanding. So the clergy is a big part, one of the major partners for the police and for communities in general, of helping families stay connected and helping families, do that soul searching and finding the guidance when sometimes they don't have it. So the clergy is a major part of that, besides the different organizations that Chief Holmes just mentioned: Family Justice, Safe Horizon, other CBOs, local CBOs. Y'all all play a major part in providing that resource. When those incidents happen that don't amount to an arrest, and the police officers, our domestic violence officers, are still mandated to just reach out to the family. It could be a harassment complaint, no arrest. Our domestic, and Juanita, tell me if I'm telling, Juanita knows, but our domestic violence officers still supposed to at least make a phone call or stop on the door and knock by to say, is there anything we can do for you? Is everything okay? We got this report. And that call and that knocking on the door is, again, just to kind of let the family know that there is help other than handcuffs. If you need something, let us know. We'll get you in the right direction. But also our clergy plays a big part in that.
There's a question.
Right, and there's I'm sorry. I was just gonna make mention, within means of safety, we will do that. Because the last thing you wanna do is spark something if you're calling the house or knocking on the door, and now maybe the other party wasn't aware that an attempt to make a call was done. So we always try and make sure that we're doing that, but it's done in a safe way.
Thank you so much. And just really quick, if everyone can put their questions in the Q&A function, we promise you they will get answered. Just one quick question, Chief, and just one quick question. Does the NYPD have a training for new recruits and officers around domestic violence? And if not, would you be open to partnering with like a great organization like Connect? And thank you, Reverend Sally, for being on.
So there is definitely training for domestic violence, but we are very interested in partnering with any organization. Right now, we're re-envisioning our training. We're bringing community partners into it. That's something we've also done as early as 2014, when we formalized the community partner title, for lack of a better term. And they were part of coming into the academy, speaking with the recruits, but also when the recruits graduated, they would welcome them into the different communities and take them around and introduce them to different people in the community. We realized that we're kind of lacking in that from when we started. So now we're looking for more community partners, and some of these listening sessions that were conducted, part of the reform and reinvention for the for collaborative regarding the police department. Those are some of the things that are mentioned during those sessions that have taken place already, bringing the community in. Also, the precincts are available. We have what we call unit training. There's a 20-minute training session or roll call, right before roll call on all 3 tours, where there used to be guest speakers that come in. So you're even welcome to walk into your precinct and speak to someone, probably the community affairs, who will put you in touch with the training sergeant or training officer, and then just say, I want to be a guest speaker to speak to the officers in those particular communities. So we are doing everything to reimagine, bringing the community in and making you part of our crime fighting strategy efforts, domestic violence, improving the quality of life. There's a huge campaign for that, always has been, but always ever evolving. So yes, please feel free to definitely, if that's something you're looking to do, just let Chief Maddrey or myself know, and we'll definitely introduce you to that.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to kick it to Dr. Deborah D Jenkins. But thank you so much. And every question in the chat, please put it in the Q&A and it will get answered. But thank you all so much for the dialogue.
Can you hear me? You still can't hear me?
Still can't hear you. Maybe
Just speak up.
see if you can speak louder if that changes anything. Okay, so what we can do is, why don't we take a moment and you can type your question. I know that's a lot, but we'll give you a moment to type out your question. And I don't know why the audio is not working for you, but another thing you might do is call in from your cell phone on a different line, and then we'll definitely be able to hear you. But anyway, I'm sorry, Dr. Deb. I think what we'll do is kick to my question then, and then we'll come back to yours as soon as we can get your audio up. So my question is around anti-racism. And I know that this is a hot topic in the city everywhere, and especially at NYPD. And just wanted to know, first of all, if you, Chief Maddrey, and anyone else you'd like to invite to talk about this, can tell us about how racism is defined in the NYPD, and how is it trained? How is this definition trained to NYPD officers at every level? And then when people see racism, how is it identified within the NYPD? We would love to get a little bit of clarity on that, because there's been a lot of talk, and I we can get into some of that if we want to, but it seems as if there isn't necessarily a full vision that is consistent across the department on what racism even is. And so if you or Chief Holmes might be able to answer that, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, a few years back, and I got the procedure, I didn't get a chance, I forgot to pull it up. But the police department, they actually put out a whole policy about racism and racial profiling, and the stuff. The definition is pretty much a standard definition when you talk about identifying people based on race, ethnicity, things like that, and in terms of people are not supposed to be stopped or detained or done anything that shouldn't be done specifically based on race. And I'm just paraphrasing this. I meant to pull a procedure up so I could read it. I'll pull it up in a moment. But I mean, we're talking about police officers, we're talking about professionals. And I think we work on the standard basic dictionary definition of race in terms of, discriminatory treatment towards people based on race or, racial identity or ethnic identity. I think we all know what it is. And it is something that's discussed here in the department. I mean, we have our Equity and Inclusion Office of Equity and Inclusion led by Dr. Meisenholder. And right now they're currently doing different training and different discussions on race within the department. It's not anything outside of the department, it's within the department, and they're talking about it. And I don't have any information to give based on these conversations, but just based on the conversations I've had with Dr. Meisenholder, I mean, you hear some things that are pretty disturbing. And you're talking about cops within the precinct discussing some of their own challenges and some of the things that they see. It's something that's pretty clear. And I think after the murder of George Floyd, no matter what the motive it was or what you believe the motive to be, when you see what we all saw on TV, the first thing that you think of is racism. When you see a white police officer on top of a black man with his knee in his neck, it screams of racism, no matter what the motive is, all right? When you talk about this disparate treatment and disparate impact, it all comes down to racism. The department is definitely doing training on it. All right, they do training on it in the academy, and I know they're working on some more training as part of the training to diffuse situations, the Blue Courage training. But it can always be more because it's just such a sensitive topic. It's something that we've all been dealing with, as long as any of us can remember. And it's a complex topic. I'm sitting here, I'm looking at this book sitting on my desk that I started to read but didn't get to, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. When you read this book, you just think about how complex the whole idea of just racism and dealing with racism, about dealing with racists and how to be an anti-racist, is something that we always have to work on in the department. It is something that the police commissioner is working on, and it's all part of the reinvention, the reimagining of the department. But it's something that's clearly been identified in our patrol guide, and it's something that we have to constantly work on. I asked Chief Holmes and Inspector Perry to chime in with me.
Hi, so Chief Maddrey is absolutely right when it comes to race. You know, the bottom line is racism is when one group feels superior to another, right? And that is one thing you can't have with your police department. So with that being said, yes, there are trainings that have been implemented, implicit bias training that's been given to make people aware of these biases that everyone has, right? In addition to that, there's been, like Jeff said, discussions with Tanya Meisenholder, who's over our equity and inclusion. And those conversations started back during COVID. And with that being said, I remember having a discussion with the police commissioner saying, you know, in order to address racism externally, we have to address it internally. You cannot begin to address it externally. And I mean, yes, externally until you look at what's going on within the department. So as a result of that, these discussions started within the department. And with that being said, when you think about our definition of racial profiling, it just refers to the discriminatory practice by the law enforcement officials of targeting individuals for suspicious or crime-based or the individual's race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. Criminal profiling, generally as a practice by police, is the reliance on a group of characteristics they believe to be associated with crime. Examples of racial profiling are the use of race to determine which drivers to stop for minor traffic violations, commonly referred to as driving while Black or brown, or the use of race to determine which pedestrians to search for illegal contraband. Another example of racial profiling is the targeting ongoing since September 11th attacks of Arabs, Muslim, and South Asian for detention of minor immigrant violations in the absence of any connection to the attacks of the World Trade Center or the Pentagon. So within the department, that's how we describe racial profiling. But it's exactly like Chief Maddrey said. You know, it's discussions that's been ongoing here, because when you look within, why is one particular person more qualified for a position than another particular person? And why does one race dominate certain units in the department instead of it being a mixture of what the department has working for them? So those are some of the internal conversations that are taking place. And we're being more transparent with that as a department. We recognize that people come from different backgrounds. There are people that are raised with, I always say, all blue people talk about all blue things, all their friends are blue and all they know is blue. But when you come to a city like New York City, right, you're met with an entire array of colors in the crayon box. So as a result of that, these are strong discussions that are taking place internally. But also addressing anything externally is equally, even more important, right? Especially when you're dealing with a person that has such authority.
And just real quick, just so everyone understands, it's very clear. We have a department policy prohibiting racial profiling and bias-based policing. This is it right here in my hand. And basically, I think me and Chief Holmes basically paraphrased a lot of what it says on the in our policy here. But again, we understand this is a policy. We're talking about culture and what actually happens. We know that it's something that this department has to continuously work on.
Well,
Chief, if you don't mind.
yeah. Oh, please, Inspector Perry. Mm-hmm.
Hi, good afternoon. I just wanted to touch on the fact of what Chief Holmes and Chief Maddrey was just saying. My personal contribution to dealing with racism in my unit, and since I've been a sergeant and moving up in the ranks, was actually touching on the conversation. I make it clear to the people that I supervise or come into contact with that it's okay to talk. So in talking, I think we open our eyes and our ears to things that others don't see or say or want to hear or say. So to deal with going on. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
How we having these conversations, how we tend to deal with the racism and racial profiling in the department as a whole as well, individually. And I say that because we have so many people coming from various areas. So somebody's beliefs or somebody's uh, different involvements and situations might not feel that they're doing something or saying something that can be racist, or they might not feel that they're profiling. But when you open up this conversation to people who have dealt with or see things differently, we tend to have a conversation that will give light to situations so that they can understand where they can be going at something in the wrong way, or where they might want to redirect themselves and do things more positively and see it from another light or perspective from someone growing up in a different area, or urban area, or yet the suburban area. So I say that to say that having conversation and touching on things and not being afraid to have those uncomfortable conversations with the people you supervise is important.
This is just beautiful to hear, and also fascinating as a Black woman who is often in spaces that Black women aren't in. In many cases, we're asked to do extra heavy lifting to help people to understand, identify, and address racism within the ranks of whatever space we're in. Certainly we see it in the church and et cetera. And it's interesting to me to have you as folks who have, I don't know, between the three of you on the force, Lord knows how many years, decades and decades and decades of experience within the NYPD. No one's going to know more about how much racism there is within the NYPD than you would, of course. And yet, the other side of it is, what do we do so that the policy actually supports the people, you know, so that you don't have to be the only ones to have those conversations. That, like, I walked into, some of us have walked into NYP, One Police Plaza, and saw a high up officer with swastikas all over his neck. I mean, what is it to have to work next to those people every day? And, you know, and Dermot Shea, Commissioner Shea, said in May, when we were seeing all of these, the differences in enforcement between Black communities and others, that he wouldn't tolerate there being any language of calling the NYPD racist. So, like, how do we move past the defensiveness, right, that can come with the language of racism, and actually do something better so that the city does indeed become safer? And I really want to figure this out, because a lot of times, like, the language tends to be the sticking point more so than the action, which I would think we would all want, which is that the city is safe. I don't know.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Complex question there, Pastor Doja, but I think I understand. And you know, when you talk about racism, and a lot of times when you defend racism, it almost takes on a tone that, hey, you know, but it's a very sensitive subject. It could be an inflammatory subject at certain times. But what it really comes down to is we understand we have a policy in place, and it really comes down to the leadership. As Inspector Perry said, hey, starting those conversations, talking to people, make sure people understand what people see, make sure what people understand what people feel. And we have to, as leaders, you know, when we become aware of it, when we identify it, when we see it, we have to address it. We have to address it. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's not something it's not always apparent, and it's not always tangible. But sometimes you hear stuff and, you know, things are floating around, and then you're looking and you're trying to deal with it as a leader. It's tough, but it's something that has to be done, because we can never see another George Floyd. We can never see anything like that ever again. All right. We can't endure the emotion. We can't endure the impact that it has on our communities. So as leaders, police leaders, myself, Juanita, Victoria, as a police department in the whole, and Commissioner Shea, who's denounced racism. And I know, Commissioner Shea is a wonderful commissioner, and he came into this department during a very tough time. In this short time in this department, I haven't seen many commissioners endure what he's had to endure. The pandemic, George Floyd, that happened in Minnesota, but the impact that it had on New York, you would think it happened right here because it was so powerful and it hurt so many people. But Commissioner Shea he's pushing, he's leading this department. I think he's doing some great things. Listen, he made Juanita the chief patrol. You couldn't ask for better than that. And he's really giving us the leeway to do these things, to have these kind of discussions, to make sure that we're connecting with our communities. And to me, that's very powerful too, when a leader understands, hey, I have a good team around me. I need you to go out here and make these connections so we can fix what's going on. And this is what this is all about. Me opening my arms up to the Daughters for Justice is really about the healing. It's really about how do we become better? How do we become better? All right. I'm looking for you. I'm not looking for you for your partnership. I'm looking for each and every one of you for your leadership. I need you to teach me, teach Juanita, teach Victoria, and everyone in this department how we could do better. And that's why I think we will be successful. As long as we're opening the doors and open our arms to great partners, powerful partners, we'll keep moving in the right direction. It's going to be challenges. It's not going to always be perfect, but we'll go in the right direction.
And just to continue with what Chief Maddrey was saying, I always think about recruitment, right? I think about the lack of African-American males on this job. I think about the lack of African-Americans, period, on this job. And that's something we have to do better at, is recruiting. And it's not that we don't recruit, and it's not that African-American males, contrary to what people say, don't take this exam, because if you look at the stats of how many that do, it would be quite surprising. I think what baffles me is still that challenge of them getting through the door, still the challenges they're met with when they start their investigation, and there's something with psych services. And I recently asked our chief of personnel, we're giving implicit bias training to all the members of the department. Yet, one of our biggest vendors, psych services, right, who makes this determination of who's qualified mentally to have this job, wasn't given implicit bias training. A lot of those psychologists come from families that are privileged, right? A lot of them, they come from families that are privileged. They may have a different way of thinking, may be raised a different way. They still bring implicit biases like we all do. So, and he said that's a pretty interesting idea, and it really is. How come they haven't been given the training? So I think that's something they're looking into, because they make a huge decision. And one thing we see a lot of is the African-American males that apply for this job, that pass the exam, qualified by DCAS to be investigated by NYPD. The minute they come through the door, there's some sort of psych hold. And when I came back to this job, because most of you know I left for a little less than a year and came back, they were asking, oh, the psychological exam, do you want to? No, I want to take it. I wanted to take it because it's been 30 something years since I had taken it, and I wanted to see what it entailed. So there's a lot of the same questions written 6 different ways. It's very fatiguing because there's several hundred questions that you have to answer. But I just wanted, for my own personal knowledge, like, what is so, different about the exam than it was when I came on, that they're not getting past that point. So we've recently hired 16 new psychologists as well, because we were seeing challenges as well. So the chief of personnel told me he just hired 16 new psychologists. But still, those are some of the challenges we're met with. And yet society in New York would believe that African-American males or brown, American males, because of the communities that they live in and the challenges they're met with the police, that they don't want to take the exam. Untrue. Untrue when you look at the number of them that are taking the police exam. What's the problem is the number that's getting through this door. So yeah. I think the more diverse the department, the more powerful we become. It's a lot of strength and diversity, but we really have to, there's no reason why that number never seems to move. 15% African Americans on the job, double that with Hispanics. And then I believe it's 40-something% of Caucasian when there's only 32% of Caucasians that reside in the city. So it's really one of the challenges that we're met with, and that's dear to my heart. And I'm looking to work with Chief Maddrey as well as the community affairs officers that work with me in doing 2 recruitment campaigns monthly, especially in Black and Brown communities.
And we can be helped. Thank you. So that is a fascinating insight, Chief Holmes. And I think this community could be very helpful in thinking that through as well. This is something very concrete that we can be helpful in.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to now bring it back to Dr. Deb Jenkins, and hopefully the audio is working for you. You're currently muted on screen. On your Zoom, it looks like you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, praise the Lord. Yes.
This is such a great conversation, and I want to thank Chief Maddrey. You have been great in embracing Daughters for Justice. Chief Holmes, I am still just jumping for joy at your appointment. I had an opportunity to meet you when you did the, do you remember, in the Bronx? And you actually said what you just said to us. So I know that this is coming from your heart about the recruitment piece. You said it to my son and I when we were with you. So we want to just thank the commissioner for appointing both of you in these critical positions that matter so much to our community. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Okay, so here are my questions, and these are questions because Apostle Ramos and I, we out of the group, we probably are the ones who are most out on the ground. We come into contact on a daily basis on the ground with your officers, and the NCOs, the YCOs, and the community affairs officers, and the sector officers, they all play a critical role. And I believe we'd all agree that they are the first line that the community sees when we see the NYPD. What I find problematic is that with the huge investment that the NYPD has made into the NCO program, they're not as visible as we need them to be. And Chief Maddrey, to your credit, you have mentioned reworking that program. But the problem that I have, I'm speaking specifically about my community. When I see the sector cops, only because I'm on the ground a lot, I know them from the NCO officers. But because, as Inspector Holmes, Chief Holmes mentioned, the Community Partners Program is a part of the neighborhood policing or the neighborhood coordinating program, officers program. We're losing touch, or they're losing touch with critical stakeholders in the community because they're not being distinguished by the community partners and conversely by the community. And I believe if it's going to be a robustly successful program, there needs to be a distinction made. They need to be more visible. Are there any intentional movements that you're making to ensure that both the NCOs and now the YCOs are more visible on the ground for the community?
So I can speak to that, especially with the NCO. So that's definitely on, I've created this 5 bucket list, right? And this is my operational mission for Patrol Service Bureau that I just pushed out to the commissioner today, and I'm gonna push it out to the respective boroughs as well. Re-envisioning the NCO and YCO philosophy.
Chief Holmes, can
you hear me?
Yeah, no, listen, because the questions popped up. People don't know what NCOs and YCOs stand for.
Oh, okay, so I'll make that sure. So the NCOs was a position that we created, and we transitioned about 1,000 people now, starting in 2015. It's called the Neighborhood Coordinating Officer of Philosophy. And now we had the Youth Officer of Philosophy because it was dear to the commissioner's heart when he took office. And he felt that that was a part of the community that we were not reaching. And not just young people coming into play with the police department, but all young people in the city of New York. And he felt it was important to have something where within their communities where they have access to different resources, whether that's PAL or some sort of trade or, you know, a summer youth job. And working with the Police Foundation as well as the Community Partnership Bureau that was created within the police department that Chauncey Parker, I don't know if most of you know him, but he's the deputy commissioner that oversees our community partnership. With that being said, we have to reinvigorate the neighborhood coordinating officers program. And we know that we are short hundreds of cops. We just got approval to put some into the police academy. We have a class of 900 that went in November. With that being said, we know that they're pulled in 10 different directions, which would explain why they're not as accessible or visible as they used to be. But with that, I want you to remember that the sector cars are equally a neighborhood coordinating officer as the neighborhood coordinating officers. Most precincts have 4, maybe 5 sectors. That's 8 to 10 neighborhood coordinating officers. It is virtually impossible for them to accomplish what we need them to accomplish without them being bolstered by the sector cars. So it's nice to hear that you actually know the sector cars also, because they're tasked with staying in the same area of the precinct, meeting the meeting the community and getting to know the community, as well as partnering with their NCOs to address any issues and concerns. So that's something that it's definitely probably the second part of my strategy, first being deployment strategies, because we have so much gun violence that we're met with. So naturally, that's at the top of my list. But equally important, although falling second, is the reimagining or re-envisioning of the neighborhood coordinating officers and the YCOs. So that is definitely at the top of the list. And I think you're going to see where they're going to be more involved with the community engagement component, the customer service component, which is everyone throughout the police department. I always say I don't like silos. I think all cops are NCOs. I think all cops are YCOs. But yes, we know that we all have a specific assignment. Some have to respond to radio runs, and the others will designate that particular time to the youth as well as members in the community. But as far as the model, the philosophy, the way of thinking, we all should be labeled as NCO, YCO, and always projecting customer service.
Just to kind of support what some of the things Chief Holmes is just saying. Me from being a chief of community affairs, I'm always thinking about how we can work more closely with the community, how we can do more things with the community. So, I have a whole list of different initiatives that we're going to be doing as far as youth engagement, neighborhood engagement. Everyone in this line, is very important that you have some connection to your precinct, whether it be through the YCOs, the community affairs officers, the NCOs, or the commanding officer. Make sure we know whatever events you're having, whatever events that you're having, meetings you're having, gatherings that you're having, and that way, if we can participate, we do so. And and I'm talking about a world without COVID right now. I'm months ahead in the future. I know right now we're in a pandemic, and it's a little more difficult. But even if you're doing things on Zoom, and I got an email from Dr. Breyer the other day. She had the commanding officer on Zoom, and I think they had a very good engagement via Zoom. We can do these things with your NCOs, your YCOs, community affairs, as we're doing now with myself and Chief Holmes. But I have a whole list of things that we're going to be doing, and Juanita is an incredible partner. Mm-hmm. So I know that the NCOs and the YCOs and community affairs will be working out there, along with the precincts, along with the sectors. Over the weekend, we were in the Bronx, so we had a great time feeding the community out there. And I had 4 officers from the 4th floor precinct, and their help was invaluable. and they got to know the community out there that day. We'll be doing more things like that to make sure we build the relationships and increase the awareness of who's who in your precinct.
Awesome. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Very
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive plan that you laid out for us, Chief Holmes and Chief Maddrey. I have a friend who's here, and this is a cry that she often has when doing ministry. She represents her temple, Barati Kimra. She put a question, you may have seen it in the chat, about services for the Hindu community. And you did mention the Southeast Asian when you were talking about racial profiling communities, Chief Holmes and Chief Maddrey. How can they become a little bit more engaged, and how can we as partners become more engaged with what is taking place, especially as it relates to the community affairs officers, because they do have specific mandates and they're really very helpful from precinct to precinct, what I've noticed anyway. But how can there be a little more intentionality around, say, the Buddhist community as well as the Hindu, because that was her question.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put my email and phone number in the chat, and I'm gonna ask our member here to give me a call, and we'll arrange to go right into the community and do something. That's what I do. We figure out something to do and we just go do it.
That's
Whether
right.
we giving out food, whether we go pray on the corner, whether we go have a discussion with young people, it's as easy as that. All you have to do is just say, hey, we want to do something, you know. And Inspector Perry's on, she's in charge of community outreach. Victoria, you can jump in on this. I'm glad she'll gladly come up to whatever sector, whatever area, whatever corner we have to come to in this city to connect with our communities. So just give me a call and we'll be there. I'm gonna put my information in the chat.
Thank you
Yes,
so much.
definitely. I'll include my information as well. I'm sorry to cut you off. I'll include my information as well. And we have members that can come from every borough, so it doesn't matter where it's at.
No, agreed. I had a very huge Hindu community that I worked with when I was the borough commander in Queens North. And everything that we did in the community, they were a part of it. And I remember when we had a big interfaith service, and it was actually housed at their temple. So, that's the beauty of New York City. We have so many different religions and ethnicities, and that's what makes us such a strong, beautiful city. So it's always been interesting to me to learn the different faiths and the different ethnicities here. And I'm quite sure Chief Maddrey and Inspector Perry, as well as the rest of the members of the New York City Police Department, would be eagerly excited about engaging all communities.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your responses.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor. And so I'd like to now open things up to Apostle Ramos, who has a series of questions and is going to lead us in talking about police accountability. Apostle, you want to make sure you unmute and come back on video.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here. Thank you so much. I mean, what an amazing conversation. Again, thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chief Holmes. I mean, just the heartfelt communication is amazing. I just want to take the time to thank all of those who registered to Daughters for Justice, that I got a chance to ask them to really be on. I want to thank them for taking the time out of their day, as well as everyone else that's here. So let me begin with a series of questions, and I'm going to just move this down a little bit. I'll try not to be too long. Thank you, Dr. Deb, for everything that you really expressed there. It was really key and really on point. As we go about, all of these things are really culminating and coming together, but surrounding police accountability, training plays a huge role in holding leadership to task. So in light of the city's current situation, serious situation, and condition, can any of you expound on any existing or any new practices that are in place that will enable departments to ensure, most importantly, community affairs, of course, Chief Maddrey, to ensure officers have knowledge and skill and engagement awareness in fair, safe, and effective policing. Now, there's another part to this. So all of the knowledge and engagement we got, we understand. But when we're doing this, it needs to really mirror serving the communities well and holding police accountable for what is not going well. It may sound redundant because we've talked about so many things, but in terms of specific accountability, is there anything new? I'll reiterate. Is there any way as they go out to serve these communities, how are they doing this well? Are they trained well? If they're not, what can we put in place and how are they being held accountable? Did everybody hear me?
Yes, yes. I mean, when you look at police accountability, you know, and that's been a subject that's really, you know, been on top of the list of some of the things that we've been discussing as a department, and even with all this reimagining and reinvention of the police department and how we police in this city, accountability has been a big thing. Recently, the department released a discipline matrix, which just shows, you know, when police officers commit infractions, how they're going to be addressed. You know, almost a standardized form of discipline. They actually put it out publicly for people to comment on. I don't know if anybody on this call had an opportunity to see it or actually made a comment on it, but it's something it's a public document. You can look at it at any time. And you know, in over the weekend, there was a New York Times article that also talked about police accountability with the CCRB, and you know, some of the things that was written in there. I was on a meeting with the police commissioner yesterday, and you know, there's certain things that he said he's going to address with the director of the CCRB, Reverend Davey. So, you know, the police commissioner is very aware that accountability and transparency are on the top of the list. And these are some of the things that we've been discussing within the community. Chief Holmes, who was, you know, right before being chief of patrol, was leading the discussions throughout the community, along with Miss Jones Austin and Miss Rice and the police commissioner himself. So accountability was one of the things they talked about, and you know, it's something that's going to take time, because when you talk about accountability, you're talking about changing the whole culture. When you really get down to it, let's be real. Again, as I said before, we could put policies in place, but you're talking about addressing and changing the whole culture, which really ultimately falls on leadership. It falls on leadership. It falls on talking to communities and understanding what's going on. It falls on us just from our own experience, you know, knowing what's right and what's wrong, and making the necessary adjustments and making the necessary changes. And the police commissioner, he basically said that, you know, he's going to be committed to making those changes. He's going to listen to the community, and without accountability, things won't change. We know that. How do you change the culture if no one's accountable? How do you fix things if no one is accountable? And the police commissioner is well aware of that, and you know, he's committed to making these changes. So we'll be working on it.
So I agree with Chief Maddrey when you're talking about accountability. And you know, if you remember back when, Jeff, we had this panel come in, I think it was called the Blue Ribbon Panel, and they actually examined our disciplinary process. And the one thing that they focused on that we weren't doing a good job at was transparency. And that's why now it's for everyone to see what we're doing. They felt we were doing a pretty good job at holding people accountable. If you look at the number of people that we fired that's been in the trial room, I think it's 98% of the members of the service that went to trial room last year were terminated, civilians included. So with that being said, they were like, you're doing the work, but you're not you're not good at being transparent about it with the public. So then you leave the public to draw their own conclusions and make their own interpretations when it comes to that. But like Chief Maddrey said, I also saw the article by Ashley regarding the CCRBs. And I think what she was referring to, we have what's called an administrative process unit for the more serious misconduct. That's where they'll make recommendations and they'll present it to the police commissioner, but the police commissioner has the final say. And he can agree with them, or he can make a lesser penalty, or he can agree with them, increase the penalty, or he cannot agree with them. And that's the conversation that was being had there. But she didn't look at all the different variables. So say if it was 25 people that was part of the administrative processing unit with CCRB, and 2 cases were where we agreed with them. The other 23 cases still had charges or disciplinary, some particular disciplinary. There's also things like retraining, other outcomes that she wasn't familiar with. So it looks as though, oh, everyone else just got a pass and it was only 2 people that were dealt with, when that definitely was not the case. But here's how I look at accountability. I know Chief Maddrey mentions leadership. I mention leadership all the time, but unfortunately, it's not a lot of us. You know, our span of control for the most part is 1 sergeant to 8 cops. And probably we don't have enough sergeants, so maybe 1 to 10. So when you're thinking about that, you have to think about the men and the women, boots on the ground, carrying out the assignment every day. And I always say you're your brothers and sisters' keeper. So if they see an officer doing something that is not consistent with our policy and procedure, there has to be that comfort, that cultural change, where they're going to step in and say, listen, I got it. Or, you know what, let me take over this, or that's not the right thing to do. There has to be an increase in that, because we don't have enough leaders to really accomplish what we're looking to accomplish. So it's really the men and women. The department recently looked at a training called ABLE training. It's something that was done in New Orleans. And what does that do? That really just speaks to intervening by making the officers feel comfortable with doing it. They even had some reward system in play. But the reward to me is where the agency's not being looked at in a bad light. The reward to me is where you're protecting your brothers and sisters' pension, your livelihood, and you're protecting the community, and you're increasing the faith and trust that your community should have in their police department. So, there's parts of it I agree with. Some parts I'm like, I'm going to give a ribbon to someone for doing something that they should be doing anyway. I don't know about that. But it should be something that's incorporated into our training, where this is, and don't get me wrong, it is when it comes to corruption and those more serious things with reporting to internal affairs, but the basics with an officer not de-escalating a situation when it could be de-escalated, things of that nature, or cutting a kid a break, exercising some discretion. Those are the things that should be part of our training. And those are the things that's going to be addressed by the bulk of our police department, which are the people in the capacity of a position of a police officer. So that's my take on it.
Thank you so much. I mean, you reiterated so many things: accountability, men and women on the ground. Even if there was enough leadership, Chief Holmes, it's not supposed to be done on your own or by yourself. So we must come together as we are doing, because no man is an island all by himself. So thank you for that. Thank you for reiterating that. And then it leads me to the next part, which you were saying is transparency. So in working with this fair and safe policing, transparency is key. Just to double back really quickly, when you're doing these processes of, I believe you called it the discipline matrix, Chief Maddrey, the infraction, and it's made public, I just want to be ensured, or we want to be ensured, or the public wants to be ensured, that communities and people of the community are involved. Because I heard you mention that the mayor and the decisions and things that were being made. So we want to just also make sure that community members be involved in processes, development, initiatives, curricula, and so on. Just wanted to drop that in there. Transparency is key, and it's very important. My next question is, would it be possible, or is there a letter grade rating system, such as they do in schools and in restaurants and in other organizations? So the leadership from top to bottom can be held accountable for timely policing. If it's not, it may sound minuscule, but it works in other areas. This system will actually allow for transparency, as we just said, in day-to-day operations, and it will also let the community know what the police are doing in that area. Some of you have already mentioned that it's not about taking away from what NYPD is doing, but adding to it with the community involved. So this system will allow that transparency. It will allow accessibility to the constituents and the areas, and it really should be considered if you don't have something like that. Thank you.
Just Apostle Ramos, just in regards to what you just said, we don't have a letter rating, grading system. I actually wrote that down, and believe me, I have a copious notes from this afternoon's meeting, because these are the things I'll talk about with Chief Holmes later on, and then, as we have our opportunities to sit down with the police commissioner when he talks to us and picks our brain, I'll bring some of these things up. I was at a meeting yesterday. I came late. Dr. Jenkins was at the meeting. She saw me walking late. But one of the things that was talked about was a lot of the things that we're doing, how they should be community-led, because that's where the buy-in and that's where the legitimacy is going to come from. When we had our meeting back a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about, and we agreed that you were going to do a training program for us that we were going to use, and I was going to use it in community affairs. And it's something that I'm still committed to doing. And I'm putting y'all on a time schedule because we have to roll this out. I don't want to go into 2021 without doing it. But to me, I think it's something important because, like I said, I can give it to community affairs right now. That's my bureau. I can have them trained on your teachings. And when I see them go out there and they're doing things right, and I'm able to call you and say, hey, something you taught, we were able to implement and was right, the buy-in is already going to be there. I'm not going to have to sell you or convince you anything because it's from you. And I think that's important in everything that we do going forward, just really having a community input, making sure we understand what the community values so we can celebrate with the community values. Some of the things that we don't really necessarily need in our communities, we can move away from. But it's important that our communities are involved. It's important that all our communities involved, because what works in Brownsville is not going to work up in the South Bronx. We have to make sure we're actually, on a broad level, yes, we have to have some policy, but we have to really tailor down in our communities. So community involvement in the training. I already mentioned that the discipline matrix was up publicly for public comment. The public and the community is going to be a big part of reimagining and reinventing policing.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to turn it right over to you, Reverend Kaji. Thank you so much.
God bless you. Thank you. That's very helpful. And it sounds like we have some clear ideas about ways that we can continue to talk about this productively and constructively. Okay, so Apostle Ramos and Minister Only Love are going to help lead us through the Q&A, and we have several questions. So I'm gonna kick it over to both of you.
Yeah, I actually was going to try to just highlight one from Alyssa Cupid first before we officially go to the amazing questions that are in the Q&A. Alyssa had asked, because it ties in with the question of accountability. Alyssa asks, how are you working with the police union and its leaders on the issue of racism? And I would just add to that, is it possible to have true accountability with a police union? Please comment.
I'm sorry, I had on mute. I mean, you know what? I've been approached with this question numerous times, and like I tell everybody, you know, unions are going to do what unions do. I mean, unions, their job is to support their members. In most cases, not all cases, in most cases, their job is to defend their union, provide support, and that's at any job. So it's you're always gonna, you know, that's something that we're always gonna have to deal with, that there's a union there and their job is to protect the rights of their members. But with that being said, we have a whole nother process of leaders, people who are in charge of investigating anything, police wrongdoings, police misconduct. And ultimately, it's going to be up to them to say, hey, this is what we discovered, this is what we found, and this is how we're going to go forward addressing it. The police union is going to defend their members. They're going to defend their members. They're going to, you know, provide attorneys and other things. Everyone has a right to you know, have a fair representation, and that's what a union's about. They're there to represent them. But that doesn't stop us from doing what we have to do. We as leaders, we as investigators in charge of looking at police misconduct or police wrongdoings, even from at a small level where maybe a union not even involved. Someone says something and the precinct commander is dealing with it. They still have a job to do, and that's to deal with that situation as it comes to them. All right. But the union is going to do what a union does. And that's what they do in every level, every job. They're going to defend their members. We still know what our rights, our responsibility is as your police leaders in the city.
So especially on the issue of racism in the NYPD, it is challenging when the president of the Police Benevolent Association comes out and when the Benevolent Association endorses a particular candidate, like the 45th president, and like, how is that representing the members? We're not so sure. It's a real point of tension, so we just name it. I know you know it, but it's hard. It doesn't necessarily set up a great relationship with the community.
Reverend Doja, it was tough. I was out at community meetings and stuff, and people were telling me who I was voting for and who I was supporting, and I'm sitting there laughing. And I said, "Listen, you know, I know Pat Lynch, and I have a decent relationship. Pat Lynch doesn't tell me who I vote for. He doesn't represent the politics and the stuff in my home. So, you know, people have to understand that. He's a union leader, and he's a very visible and vocal leader. And, you know, he uses this platform to say what he says, but he does not represent every member of the police department. And other members of the police department came out in the newspaper and articles and made it clear that, hey, he doesn't represent all of us. And, you know, we're going to, you know, exercise our rights at the appropriate time. And it's not going to be on the camera. It's not going to be on television. So, you know, believe me, I took a lot of heat for that. More heat than y'all believe. I was getting emails. People was emailing me, "You're the chief of community affairs, and this is who you're doing. This is what you're doing." And I was laughing. I said, whoa. I don't bring my politics to work.
And just to line up with what you're saying, Jeff. So I agree equally. First of all, I was in a unit called investigations. So I dealt with fraternities, unions, you know, for a great period of time. With that, you know, I know Patty Lynch, I know his children, I know the rhetoric that they preach, right? And in his conversation, he not only you, Jeff, but people really thought the police commissioner, the entire department supported that because they thought he was the voice for the entire department. And although we had other members come out and say he doesn't speak for us, the damage was already done. They came out a little late in the game, so to say. So but with that, people had already drew on what Patty said. And me, I'm the one that Patty will tell you, I will call him up and tell him, listen, this is where you're wrong. This shouldn't have been said, no matter what it is, whether he takes heed to it or not. But with that, in his words, he really thought like the president had an effect on local government as far as funding of the police, which was his first mistake. And like Jeff said, he took a lot of heat. I equally think about the police commissioner, how they felt that. But the unions have said many things in their time. And one thing I've always said to them, you can never not tell a cop when he's wrong, but they will always do it, like Jeff said. And they're never going to go against their member. They're going to look at everything they can do to support him, if he's pending charges, if he's pending arrest. And I equally see that when I worked in the private sector. I have people that work for the airport. I've seen it there. I've seen it dealing with DC 37, dealing with a lot of our civilian members. But again, they are not as vocal as naturally the police department in New York City, and then him being the head of the largest component of the police department, which are the police officers. So I agree with you. It's not, you see, Patty's a little quiet now. It's not a good thing what he did, and we all equally agreed with that, but we know that unions are not held accountable or by the same rules and regs that our other members of the service are. When we had the cop that said Trump 2020, that, over social media platform, this was viewed, he was immediately suspended because all officers are supposed to be apolitical, but these particular fraternities or unions have a different set of rules, unfortunately. And that was a huge challenge that we were met with when that happened. But I often tell my police officers, yes, you have a head of a union. That is Patty Lynch for certain period of time for so many years. But I said, when you responded to that gun run, I don't see him in a car next to you. And that's always been my practice to say that. So you have to make decisions. You have to think about the community you're working in. And I don't see Patty Lynch out here put in those precarious situations that you may be put in. So I would just behoove them to just establish great community relations.
That's profound. Minister Only Love and Apostle. Yep.
Thank you so much. And so, Apostle, do you want to explain how the Q&A goes, or would you like me to explain?
You can go ahead and explain. If I could just say that we just had our community affairs officers come in. I wanted Chief Maddrey and Chief Holmes to see Detective Hooks and her partner dropping off turkeys for people in the neighborhood and in the community. And so I just wanted you to recognize that. Minister Only Love, yes, ma'am.
Yes, so thank you so much, Chief Maddrey. Thank you, Chief Holmes. Thank you, Deputy Inspector Perry. Thank you for, as the young folks say, keeping it real.
Yes.
I am the youngest ministers, I think I could say that, me and Reverend Kaji. So we are going to sisters who joined us. Thank you so much for joining us. I've seen so many women pastors that I know from so many sectors. So we have your questions here. One question was addressed by Reverend Dr. Chloe. What we're going to do is read your name and your question. In order to get to as many people's questions as possible, if you ask multiple questions, we're going to skip your duplicate question and come back if we have time. And so we want to hear from you. And then after that, we will talk about important action steps. So I will open up and then I'll pass it over to Apostle. So from Juanita Presley, do folks in distress have to call 911 to get help needed from the family justice centers? So
No. 911 is for emergencies, okay? And this is what we talk about all the time. 911 is not the default number. 911 is an actual emergency going on right now. A lot of our family justice centers, you can walk right in. I know from my time in Brooklyn, in the DA's office, they have a family justice center on the second floor. All you do is just walk right in and just say, hey, this is who I am, and this is the help I need. This is what I'm going through, and they start providing services right then and there.
And like I said earlier, you don't even have to file a police report. Family justice officers there just in case you choose to file a report, but then there's that family side where they may be able to intervene, where it never has to go criminal. So just always remember that.
thank you so much. That's so helpful to know. Let's go to Kelsey Crench, Reverend Kelsey Crench. What might an improvement in branding or marketing of these family justice centers look like? And the rest of that question is, what specifically can the NYPD do to make these things more well-known? And how might clergy play a supportive role in those efforts? Thank you for that wonderful question. And we turn it back over to you.
I think it's just through discussions, like when you're speaking with your, members in your of your parish, or even if it's just a family member or a friend of a family member that needs some guidance in those particular areas. So, I think the best job of branding and marketing is the word of mouth, but the police department can also speak with the family justice centers and have them do a push, right? They can do a push through community meetings or come out and support even our turkey giveaways that Chief Maddrey's been doing. If you ask them, they will definitely participate. I've seen Safe Horizon out there. I know some of the members from the court that oversee that family bureau component. They will definitely be part of that. So I think just reaching out, walking into the courthouse to that particular department and just inquiring, how can we do more marketing that you would simply exist?
Chief Holmes, you have to go, I know.
I do. I apologize to everyone.
Thank you so much,
another
Chief.
meeting, okay? Thank you. I look forward to seeing you soon. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
She was fighting not to leave. That's why I had to say something so I can push her off. Believe me, I want you to stay here with me, but I know you have another meeting. Thank you, Juanita.
Yes, thank you so much.
I know we're winding down, so I'll just finish up. Me and Victoria will just finish up.
Okay.
That's it. I'm going to give if anybody, I put my information in there. If anybody needs me to expand on any answers, please send me an email or call. I know we want to get to as many questions as possible, so I'm going to give the short versions to a lot of these answers.
Yes.
That's just for the sake of time and get to each question.
Thank you so much. And I think Chief Holmes' information was in the chat. And maybe in a future gathering, we could bring some of these family court assistants, these different YCOs and women clergy together, and we can kind of network in person. That's just my organizer mind, Chief. But now we're going to get a question from my sister, Christina Dozer, from Senator Brian Benjamin's office. Is there a city-driven public awareness campaign in this season about assessing domestic violence resources during a pandemic? If not, the city should consider partnering with women of faith leaders in a social media campaign or something like that. And so, Chief, if you could answer that question.
I don't believe so. October is traditionally Domestic Violence Awareness Month. All right, for those who don't know, I hope everybody does know. But I think even with this pandemic this year, I think just a lot fell by the wayside. With the pandemic, dealing with the protests, dealing with the impending election back in October, a lot of things fell by the wayside. But it's meetings like this that kind of reinvigorate these topics and exactly what we should be doing and what our community needs. So it's duly noted. And it's something I'll discuss with our domestic violence unit, Chief Kathy Ryan upstairs, and we'll make sure that we're doing the best that we can do with the mayor's office and with our clergy partners. We work with our community partners, Stephanie McGraw up in Harlem, someone y'all know. I think we'll be doing something with her next week. My officers were with her on Saturday doing stuff, and we did things throughout the summer just to kind of help, bridge the gap and help work with our communities and make sure that people are just aware of domestic violence and how it's really impacting families during this pandemic. So, but we could always do more. This is a big city.
Thank you, Chief. And I would highly recommend Reverend Sally McNichol and Q Walcott from Connect NYC, based in Harlem, but they work with faith leaders throughout the city. They are literally who I go to when someone in my faith community has a crisis. I mean, they are just great. So I'm going to ask one more question from Rabbi Ellen Littman, and it's so great to see you on here, Rabbi. How is the NYPD doing with domestic violence in their own officers' families? What support do officers get to help prevent violence in their families?
Right.
Thank you, Rabbi. And Chief, we turn it over to you.
Yes. You know, the department we have various resources in here to deal not only with domestic violence, but stress, financial distress. I mean, during this pandemic, I've seen officers go through financial distress. Even though they were working and stuff, their family members lost jobs. I had one of my officers, his wife lost a job, and it caused tremendous financial distress on him and his family. People getting sick, it caused a lot of distress. And then, of course, domestic situations and other situations. But we have our counseling unit, our psychological services unit. All our officers have an app on their department issued phone, a wellness app, where they could hit the button and write what their problem is, and they get services. We have our chaplains unit. You know, the department has a chaplain unit of about 14 chaplains who are there to provide counseling and guidance to our members, and our peer officers support group. The union itself has support for police officers. So there's a lot of different outlets, different avenues the officers can use. But again, we also know the biggest challenge is people like to hide their own issues. They don't want to be upfront about their own issues. Everyone want to appear to be stronger than what they are. So it's always talk about pushing people to let them know it's nothing wrong with speaking up for yourself. It's nothing wrong with coming forward and saying you need help. That's our biggest challenge.
And Chief, if I could chime in, like Chief Holmes even said, we are our brother's keeper. So we reiterate these things to our monthly meetings, our roll calls. We constantly tell each other, look next to you, let each other know that we're working with each other more than we see our loved ones at home. So a lot of times we notice things different about someone, and if we really care and we're concerned about their well-being, we have to say something when we see something that isn't correct, in a sense. If we see them acting in a different way, more irate, or just seeming depressed, we sometimes have to make that call for them. And we have other outside agencies such as PAPA as well, that they can make these anonymous calls to say that they think someone is, suffering or having a hard time, or might be a threat to themselves. So that's some of the other things that we do, is actually looking out for one another.
Thank you so much, Deputy Inspector. And I turn it over to Apostle Stacey Ramos to ask the next few questions. Thank you so much, Apostle.
Thank you so much, Minister Only Love. Deputy Inspector Perry, thank you for your comments with community interaction and engagement. I meant to say that earlier. I really appreciate your comments. So the next question is from Bettina Bombay or Bamba. Also, DV victims are caught in a catch-22 because if they are financially dependent and have children, they may have housing options or they may not have housing options. We definitely need more mediation made accessible to prevent dissolution. And so what Bamba is asking right now is that a lot of resources be presented. And if there are any resources, because of these families that are caught in the catch-22 or these victims caught in the catch-22, can we please really list them on the screen?
You know what? I won't be able to list them at this moment, but what I'll do is I'll get a list of the resources from Chief Ryan, and then I'll send it to the Daughters for Justice, and I'll ask my my sisters here to disseminate that information out to everyone on this call, if that's okay.
That's fine. Thank you so much. Thank you for that great question. I'm going to move on to the next question, and it's from Udina Leek Jackson. If police are being trained and conversations are being had within the departments, how is it that, I'm sorry, other questions are coming in as I'm reading. How is it that the police are not making it a practice in the community?
Apostle, can you just repeat that question? I missed a piece of it.
Sure. If the police are being trained and conversations are being had within the departments, how is it that the police are not making it a practice in the community?
In terms of what?
I would assume it is around accountability. I think I'd be safe to say that.
Yeah, because I'm not sure. Is it around accountability, racism, training? or whatever. I mean,
I can clarify, this came in during the racism conversation.
okay, yeah. So, you know, I mean, again, it's something that's being discussed within the department, but it's not an easy subject. You know, not many people are going to walk outside and start saying, "Hey, let's discuss race" to people in the community, and that's not going to just happen. But it's something that's being discussed, and is being discussed to try and bring more awareness to it, and to make sure that we understand what our function and our role is out here, and how race cannot be a part of policing. It cannot be a part of how we treat people. It cannot be a part of how we use our power as law enforcement officers. So that's some of the discussions that are being had. But again, and also we talked about transparency. You know, we're having these discussions in the department to make things better. A lot of people don't know that. It's not something that's highly publicized. I talk about it here because I do want you to know that it's something that's being done. It's something that's right now in process, and it's something that's being done to make things better.
Thank you so much, Chief. Apostle, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you, Chief, for the response, and thank you for the question. We're going to go now to Rabbi Ellen Lippman. Are there conversations taking place about police officers required to live in New York City? How about new hires, hiring only people who live in New York City?
Victoria, you want to answer?
That, I believe that's a discussion that's been going on for years. And you got to think, we're an agency of 36,000 members. So to have to be able to, that would be great if we can hire, but like the chief mentioned earlier, getting through that door, if they're taking these tests, but yet and still they're not getting through the door because of whether it's psych services and different things like that, that's hindering them. We can't not hire individuals, or should I say, pinpoint particular individuals in certain neighborhoods only, and end up not having the manpower to actually protect and serve the members of the community. So, I mean, I've raised that same topic myself. That would be great. And that's why anytime I'm out in the street and I'm doing any outreach and I'm talking to anybody, any residents, family members, anything, I'm constantly promoting taking this job, because I feel myself personally for being a member of a resident of the 5 boroughs. It's important to actually have a connection to the community, because that way you can be passionate about the work that you're doing. So I think as members on this call today, we can actually, you know, make it appeasing or appealing to our loved ones and people that we come in contact with to take this job. And then hopefully those that are applying and those that are fighting to get through that door can be those that are residents of the 5 boroughs. But you know, what happens is a lot of people that live on the outskirts are the ones that are taking these exams. And like the chief said, I'm not taking away from the fact that there are people in the 5 boroughs taking it as well. But they're the ones that's answering the question right, should we say, to get through that door. And we need to fix other aspects of the hiring process so that everyone can get through and we can have an equal amount of, we can have diversity, so to say, in our department.
Because we know, right, that there are people who, especially when there are particular communities that have access to certain jobs, that sometimes we teach each other the ways to answer the questions so that we pass.
Exactly.
And that may be happening disproportionately in places outside of the city, outside of Black communities, outside of brown communities. And that's not really what I bet the department thought it was after in these different steps. So
definitely. I'm the first one in my family to actually become a member of the police department. And I try to encourage, I have a good, big family, a huge family, and me trying to convince them, it doesn't work all the time. I've convinced one other, so I now am one of 2. But other than that, you know, it takes work and we all got to do it collectively.
That's right. Absolutely. I'll do one more before I turn it over to my sister. This is a percentage question. How many of police officers live in New York City? If you have that information. Is there a mandate or a lot of officers, sergeants that live in the suburbs? Thank you for the question.
There is no mandate. Police officers are not required to live in the city. They have to live either in the city, Long Island, Nassau, Suffolk, and certain parts of upstate, Westchester, Orange, Putnam. It's like 4 counties they can live in. And they're still, they'll meet the requirement. I think Victoria answered the question about, why, the whole issue. And in terms of sergeants, no, but I don't have the percentage. There is a percentage that the department has. I don't have the percentage in front of me, but I believe it was upward of like 40-something% that do not live in the city.
Thank you so much, Chief. Minister Only-Love?
Sorry, I'm trying to make sure we mark the questions answered. I'm going to try to get through 1 or 2 more questions. And thank you so much for asking these questions. I'm going to read a question from Prophetess Udina Lake Jackson. Thank you so much for being on, Prophetess. Her question is, but as long as, how truthfully thorough are the evaluations being done to ensure that candidates are really qualified?
That's I don't think I can answer that question objectively, because I don't have access to candidates' records as they come in. People are applying for the job and stuff. So I don't think I can answer that question objectively because I just don't have the information.
Okay, thank you so much, Chief, and thank you, Prophetess, for that question.
Just one add-on. Everybody goes through a thorough background check. So people submit their stuff. They're vetted by the police department. They go through a medical process. They go through a psychological process, which is written and oral. So this is what's done before you can be hired. Okay, so just everyone understands that. But in terms of that going down to individualized, talking about candidates, I don't think I can answer that question because I'm just not privy to that information.
Okay, thank you so much, Chief. And we have a question from Pastor Julie out of Brooklyn. And thank you so much for being on, Pastor. So she said, thank you for this conversation about NCOs and YCOs and community affairs officers and sector patrol officers. I have to admit, it strikes a different and more positive tone than I'm experienced as a faith leader trying to establish a relationship with these officers in my area. For example, our local community affairs officers stopped by wanting to plug into our church's outreach programs, youth tutoring, and our soup kitchen, but without any actual work to build relationships with our community and with great resistance. I am so sorry. Someone just put a question in.
I know.
Sorry about that. With great resistance to addressing the fundamental distrust many of our vulnerable members have with police presence in these programs. We invited the CAOs to volunteer at a soup kitchen event as a way to have them begin getting to know our folks, and then they didn't show up. How do we make sure this relationship building effort is going both ways? Thank you for that excellent question, Pastor Julie. And Chief and Deputy Inspector, I turn it over to you.
Yeah, just really quick, Pastor Julie, thank you for that. And to everyone on here, I am the Chief of Community Affairs for this department, the Police Commissioner's Chief of Community Affairs. When you have issues like that, when you send out invites and you get no response or people don't show up, I'd appreciate a phone call to me or a text message or email to me. That way we can rectify that. And Pastor Julie, you're absolutely right. That's what it's all about. The church is one of the best ways and one of the simplest ways for us to connect with the community by coming there and volunteering and doing work with the church, helping out. Great way to get to know people, great way to start building the trust and breaking the ice in the community. So when you have events like that, and you reach out to your precinct, if you're not getting a response or you get an empty promise without a follow-up phone call to explain, we had a shooting and we had to turn around, a protest broke out, we were mobilized, something to let you know that they had to respond to a police emergency, I would appreciate a phone call to me so we could rectify that.
Thank you so much, Chief. And just for the sake of time, this question will take 1 second. My sister Aisha Barton Fleming from Hanashim asked, are these departments called family justice centers? The parts of the court that we were talking about. Chief, can you say the name again?
Yes, and I'm going to speak from my best experience in Brooklyn, down at the DA's office. It is absolutely called the Family Justice Center. You go in there, you ask for the Family Justice Center, they'll direct you right to it. And I can find out. I know Brooklyn has one for sure, and I know there's others through the city. Again, I'll get that information as a follow-up and send that over.
Thank you so much, Chief. And so we have answered 16 questions. We are so sorry we couldn't answer every question, but we want to respect your time because we know your time is very busy. Thank you so much, Chief Maddrey, Deputy Inspector Holmes, Chief Juanita, who had to leave. Now we are going to quickly go into some action steps. So we want to continue this relationship. We want to be a resource with recruitment, with making the connections with domestic violence, with getting the word out about YCOs and all of these great programs and initiatives. So we thank thank you, Chief. We thank you, Deputy Inspector. But sisters, I do want to talk about some action steps because this is not just a one-time event. We, Daughters for Justice has been meeting since July. Together, but also on Chief Maddrey's Faith Leader Zooms. And thank you all for welcoming us. But Daughters for Justice is a movement, a movement for women clergy to organize around the issues that are important to them concerning radical change to the NYPD, concerning ending community violence of all kinds, whether it's gun violence or domestic violence, concerning various justice issues. And we know that there are great justice organizations all throughout the city, but we believed when it came to the issue, especially of policing, that there needed to be a venue for women clergy. And so we want to invite you to email us at info@daughtersforjustice.com. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And just our founders are Apostle Stacy Ramos, Garden of Gethsemane Ministry. She's also an NYPD liaison. The Reverend Dr. Chloe Breyer from the Interfaith Center of New York. The Reverend Kaji Dosa, Park Avenue Christian Church and New Sanctuary Movement. Dr. Deborah Jenkins, Faith at Work Christian Church. She's also an NYPD liaison. And myself, Minister Only Love Chica Austin of Prophetic Whirlwind Ministries and U.S. Coordinator for Mothers of the Nations, which is birthed out of Nigeria. And the founder, Bishop Otuya, sends her greetings. She lived 20 minutes away from the Lekki massacre where police in Lagos killed some of their citizens. So everyone does not get to have, I know things are not perfect, but everyone doesn't get to have this interface. If Bishop Otuya and the women in Nigeria tried to have this interface, it would be very different. And so we want to be mindful and just, we thank you for being with us today. Now, I do want to talk about some organizing next steps. So I'm going to temporarily take down that slide, but there are some action steps you can take. This is not a closed movement. This is an open movement. We need you. And so you can join Daughters for Justice as an individual, or your congregation can join. And in the follow-up email to this town hall, you will get an application and what the membership donation is, but don't let finances hold you back. Scholarships and payment plans are available. Why are we talking about membership fees? Well, I learned in about over a decade of faith organizing that when you fund your own movement, you hold the integrity of it. And so we want to be able to do this work without losing any type of integrity. And I'm not saying if you take foundation funds that you're losing your integrity. I was the ED of a nonprofit for 4 years, but family, y'all get the spirit of what I'm saying. You can also lead a subcommittee on one of the issues we discussed today: neighborhood engagement, anti-racism, police accountability, domestic violence, and mental health, which was kind of weaved in, but we do care about the mental health of our city and our officers. So you will get an email about how to sign up for one of those committees. You can, if you want to have a one-to-one with one of the founders of Daughters for Justice to learn more about getting involved in the organizing and the leadership of this organization, I want you to email info@daughtersforjustice.com and someone will follow up with you this week. I also want to challenge the women faith leaders that were on today to report back on this town hall to your congregations, on your Zoom services, on your small services in your organization. Don't just come and hear all this great information and not report it. Now, when things go bad with the NYPD, we quick to share it, but we also got to be quick to elevate this good conversation. And then we want you to connect with us and Chief Maddrey. We do have, even though you're not a sister, we do have an action step agenda for you, if you don't mind, and for our inspector. So this is going to be a long-term movement. We're not about talk, we're about action. I've been on the street with Apostle Ramos on the Shabbat, giving out PPE, preaching the gospel, helping people. Y'all know if I'm doing something on the Shabbat, it's important. So I know for a fact from organizing with all of these women of the Most High for years that they're about the action, not just the talk. And y'all know I'm about the action too. So Chief, even though you're not a sister, we're gonna give you an action step too. We just wanted to ask, would you commit to having another gathering with women faith leaders where we can talk about how we're working together on these issues and more action steps?
Absolutely. That's not even a question for me. Whenever you need me, you call me. You have my number. I'm available to you. I know there was a lot of domestic violence questions,
Yes.
probably more than anything else. If you want, we can do this again and we can tailor it right to DV.
Yes,
I
that
can
would
get
be
the
excellent.
I can get the department's domestic violence unit
Yes.
has a lot more answers than I do, because this is what they do
Yeah.
every day. So we can work that out. Any other questions we can do. I just, I kind of scroll through some of the questions and stuff, and I just want people to know that, for me personally, my unit, Victoria, and I can speak for Chief Holmes, it's much more about traditional policing. I mean, we're up in Harlem right now giving out hundreds of turkeys. Last week we fed our communities twice, giving out PPE. We're doing a lot more than just playing, cops and robbers. All right. We're really being a resource to our community. And at another time I could talk about some of the things we're doing. We just structured our youth conversations that we're going to be doing soon. In the youth conversations, there's going to be one member from the clergy, at least one member from the clergy, one member for violence interrupters that are going to sit down and help out with that conversation to bring a little more credibility to it. So we're doing a whole lot of different things. Inspector Perry's been doing she's got her financial workshop, her career workshop, resume writing that she's been doing inside of 1PP, bringing young people upstairs where they're in front of a computer and we're helping them build their resume. So we're doing a whole lot of different things, trying to bring life skills and using our own experiences to help young people out and people who need the help. So see us as a resource, see us as a positive resource that can help out in so many different ways, please.
Thank you so much, Chief. We deeply appreciate that. Sisters, we appreciate your voices. Email us today. Step up. This is our movement. Is no eyes. It's all a collective. Now I'm going and thank you, Inspector, and thank you everyone for your questions. I'm going to, Inspector, did you have something you wanted to say before we turn it back to Pastor Kaji? Yes.
I just wanted to touch on what Chief said about the career workshop that we have. This is open to everyone. It's pretty much the age of 17 and up. So if you have any loved friends or family or people that you know, I actually even will lower it in one age by 16, because at 16 you start working anyway, and we can add a resume with putting together like some of their community service work they have done, because they start community service in high school. So it's basically done every third Thursday of the month. We actually class this Thursday from 11 to 2, which is actually the 19th. So if you have anyone that's interested, you can email myself or you can email communityoutreach@nypd.org. I'll put in the chat as well. And moving forward, if someone wants September, January, February, whichever month that works best for them, we're also taking the names for them as we speak. So you can actually include them as well. All I just need is their name and phone number so that we can, call them up and confirm their availability when the day comes.
Thank you so much, Deputy Inspector. And we will try to get that email address out in our follow-up email. And if you send us the date and time of that workshop, we can get that out too. But thank you again, Chief Maddrey and Deputy Inspector. And now I'm turning it back to Pastor Kaji.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. And we just are so grateful for the incredible voices and spirits on the call. I think that seeing how many questions we had about something that ties in so deeply to our ministries, like intimate partner violence being such a deep theme with this group, is really telling about how much we care about our city. And one of the formational scriptures that pulled Daughters for Justice together is just to seek the welfare of the city, from Jeremiah. And that's what we are trying to do. We're trying to be led by the prophets and realize that there are people within the NYPD who also are led by the prophets, want to seek the welfare of the city. And we want to elevate that as we seek the welfare of the city and the safety. I mean, in one of the conversations that we had recently, we were just thinking, like, when we talk about public safety, we wonder about for whom. And I think for the people who from NYPD and also from people on the call, when we envision public safety, we're envisioning the safety of little Black children in Harlem and the Bronx. And we're envisioning public safety for teenagers, Black teenagers and brown teenagers in Brooklyn. And we recognize that sometimes public safety is defined for others, but I think the people on this call recognize that defining it there benefits everyone. So we really want to figure out how we can get to that point, and are just so grateful for all of you and all the work that you're doing. So we're going to keep working together, and thank you. Chief, I just wanted to give you one more moment to say anything that you wanted to do and wrap up, and then we're going to close in prayer.
No, it was an incredible conversation. Daughters for Justice, again, thank you for your leadership, your partnership. And I'm looking forward to, going forward and continuing the conversation and carrying out the action steps. So again, we can increase public safety, we can increase positive police community relationships and moving forward.
Thank you so much. All right, so now Apostle Ramos for some closing remarks and prayers.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to thank you all again. We've said it so many times, Chief Holmes and Deputy Inspector Perry, and just NYPD that is truly helping us to bridge the gap. I just wanted to leave some closing remarks in terms of, but before I do that, I'm sorry, I really want to thank Daughters for Justice. I really want to thank my sisters for coming together. I really want to thank Dr. Deb, Reverend Kaji, Reverend Chloe, Oni Love for all the hard work that she's done and what she's put in here. And I just didn't want to go without saying that. So I love you all very deeply. And I think you are completely anointed and you are on the move for the Lord. Not that you don't already know that. I just want to come in agreement with you on it. So I came across something just to close very briefly. And it was just, no man is an island entirely of itself. Every man is a piece of the whole pie, a piece of the whole community, a part of the man's, the human just quilt. And I just want to say that Christ even enlisted help. And because no one is doing this on their own, we really appreciate coming together. We really appreciate all of the topics really being thought out and answered so divisively and just really from the heart. We really appreciate and understand that if we don't work together, there will be no success. And so I just really wanted to share that with you all because we have to come together. We have come together. We will continue to do so. And we thank you so much for allowing us to come on this platform in reimagining and keeping transparency at the forefront with Daughters for Justice. I was going to close out in prayer, but I'm going to ask my sister, Chloe, to really close out in prayer for us. I just would really appreciate it. I hope that's okay with all of my other sisters on the Zoom.
This is a prayer that we say at the end of many services in the Episcopal Church, and it's appropriate because the conversation in this hour has been so honest and well thought through and enlightening that it is truly has been a sacred couple of hours. The Lord be with you. May what we have said with our lips, may we believe in our heart and show forth in all we do and say in the coming weeks ahead. And may the souls of the departed through the mercy of God rest in peace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, so much. We love you. God bless you. Stay safe in these days.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Nice meeting you all.
You as well. Thank you. God bless you.